그래서 입학식 때 그 사진 찍은 게 집에도 많거든요. 그래서 그런 기억이 정말 유진상가 하면 정말 저의 아이들하고 그 추억이 너무 여기 많이 있었기 때문에 유진상가는 잊지 못하죠. 제 인생에서.
For half a century, Eugene Complex has embraced the lives of countless people.
늘 그 자리에 있어서 고마운 존재들이 있잖아요. 요즘같이 이렇게 빠르게 변하는 시대에 이렇게 유진 상가나 유진 아파트가 있어서 오늘 정말 되게 놀라웠었고요. 그리고 보면서 이제 제가 느꼈던 건 그 마음이 좀 한게 훈훈해지면서 따뜻해지는 그런 느낌을 받았습니다. 여기 사람들과 이 동네의 이야기들, 이 지역의 이야기. 예. 앞으로도 제가 이 유진상가 있는 이 동네도 사실은 저희 동네에서 그렇게 멀지 않거든요. 저도 앞으로는 저희 지역에 있는 제가 눈여겨보지 못한 저희 동네의 숨은 장소나 뭐 건물, 그다음에 그곳에 사는 사람들의 이야기들을 한번 잘 듣고 눈여겨볼 필요가 있을 것 같습니다.
Welcome to Arirang TV's special coverage of South Korea's 21st presidential election. This is Kim Mo-gyun. As the clock strikes 12, the picture is beginning to take shape. With over 50% of the votes now counted, the contours of this historic race are becoming clear, and so is the likely direction of the country's next leadership. After a fast-paced, tight-stakes snap election, South Korea appears to be closing in on its next president. All three major broadcasters have projected Democratic Party candidate Jae-myung as the projected winner. Stay with us as we break down the latest tallies, regional trends, and reactions from campaign headquarters as the nation moves closer to an official result and a new chapter in its democratic journey. So ballot counting is now in full swing at hundreds of counting stations across the country, with over 50% of the votes now having been counted. For more on how the process is unfolding on the ground, we connect to our reporter Park Gun-woo, who is standing by at one of the key sites tonight. Gun-woo, good to have you back with us.
Great to be back, Morgan.
So Konu, again, walk us through what you're seeing over there. How's the ballot counting progressing in your location?
Yes, so I'm once again standing at the ballot counting station set up at Seoul National University in Gwanak-gu District, southern Seoul. And this is one of the 254 ballot counting stations nationwide and 25 here in Seoul. As counting began at around 8:30 p.m. and specifically at around 9 p.m. at this ballot counting station, it's been about 3 to 4 hours since the process started. As you mentioned, as the counting rate stands over 50% now, I can report that the process has been running smoothly and orderly at this place specifically. But in some places, there were minor disturbances as a few observers shouted out that the process seemed suspicious or that the CCTV inside wasn't working properly. Police intervened to restore order and allow the counting to continue. Since the voter turnout had already surpassed that of the previous presidential election an hour before polls closed, the counting process is expected to take a bit more time. Now, about how the counting works, there are 8 key sections involved. First, after the ballot boxes are safely transported to the stations under a police escorted election observers, they are received by the ballot reception team to check for any issues. Then the boxes are passed on to the box opening team where the ballots are taken out and neatly organized. The ballots are then fed into a sorting machine that automatically classifies them by candidate. And this was introduced in 2002, which made the process speed up. And the machines aren't connected to any network, so it blocks hacking them possibly. And classified ballots are known to be manually checked in this election. The ballots are then moved to the review team where they are manually checked once more to filter out any invalid votes. It then goes through 2 more rounds of verifications before being confirmed and officially announced by the commissioner. Early votes or votes from overseas are also being counted as soon as they arrive.
Right, so it's a lengthy process and a crucial one. I understand that the election authorities are making every effort to ensure transparency throughout the ballot counting process. Give us more details.
Yes, as you mentioned, a total of around 70,000 personnel have been deployed for that issue, and that includes election observers, 6 from each party with the candidate and 3 for each independent candidate. Police authorities raised the national emergency level alert to the highest kapo from 6 a.m. this morning nationwide, enabling full mobilization, including special security forces outside the counting centers. The National Fire Agency has been mobilized in case of emergencies as well. The National Election Commission expects the counting to be completed by 6 a.m. Wednesday, but normally the leading candidate is revealed earlier. In the past 20th presidential election, the projected winner was announced at 2 a.m. due to a neck-and-neck race, and it was announced around 10 p.m. during the 19th election. This time, it was expected to be made a little past midnight, and medias are reporting such, but there hasn't been any updates from an official election organization. So if there are some updates, I will bring you back with during the later newscasts. And that's all I have for you now. Back to you, Mugen.
Thank you for that, Konu. Now, as the nation awaits the final election results, the candidates and their parties are likely feeling the tension more than anyone else. For a look at the atmosphere inside the major rival camps, we turn to our political correspondents on the ground. Let's begin with our Shin Ha-young, who's standing by at the Democratic Party's headquarters. Ha-young, what's it like there?
Well, Morgan, I'm currently at the campaign headquarters of the Democratic Party of Korea, where, as you can see behind me, none of the members of the election campaign committee are present. And unlike a couple of hours ago, when the exit poll predicted Lee with 51.7% of the vote, and applause and cheers broke out here at the headquarters, they have all left. And candidate Jae-myung is not here either. And instead, he left his home in Incheon's Gyeongbu district just a few minutes ago. He's expected to head to the party's main headquarters, not this campaign site, to thank party members. And before he left, he told to people that the vote count is still underway, so it may be premature to make any definitive statements. However, he added that if this result is confirmed, he would like to express his deepest respect for the great decision made by the people. And separate from the campaign headquarters, the DP has been holding an event for the past 2 hours at an outdoor stage in Yeouido near the National Assembly, where party members and supporters are watching the vote count together. And he is also expected to head there and deliver a speech sooner or later. Mo-kyun?
Thank you for that, Jae-myung. Now let's also connect to our Kim Do-yeon standing by at the People Power Party's campaigning headquarters. Do-yeon, how's the mood over there?
Mo-kyun, not much has changed since we spoke last about 2 hours ago now. As I said, many of the People Power Party members had left this situation room by 8:30 after the exit polls came out, and it showed that there was a two-digit difference between the two candidates. Now, it has been largely quiet throughout the night with something of a somber atmosphere. Kim Moon-soo is still believed to be at his home watching the vote count. And as Jae-myung mentioned, many of the media major broadcasts have already called DP's Jae-myung as the projected winner. Now, with that in mind, the media is still waiting to see if Kim will make his stop here at the Situation Room to accept the loss. But last time an official from the camp met with reporters, he said no words have come from Kim yet. Kim, as you know, has consistently trailed DP's Jae-myung in national polls, often well outside the margin of error, largely due to backlash over the martial law declaration and the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Still, there was cautious hope that Kim's relentless campaign might have sparked a late turnaround, banking on support from shy conservatives and undecided voters. But again, that does not seem to be the case. That's all for now. Back to you, Mo-kyun.
Thank you for bringing us the updates, Do-yeon and Jae-myung. It's much appreciated. Now let's go over to our Bae-eun-ji once again at our election wall for the latest on the election results. Eun-ji, give us the updates.
Mo-kyun, almost 8 in 10 South Koreans voted in this election, and the voter turnout was the highest in 28 years. The votes are now being counted, and we are seeing more results coming in. Let's take a look at the exact numbers. As of 11:30 p.m., a little more than 36% of the votes have been counted. And South Korea's 3 main broadcasters that conducted the exit polls are now projecting the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung as the next president of South Korea. So far, Lee has earned 48.7%, and the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo has earned 42.9%, followed by Lee Jun-seok with 7.3%. Now let's break this down by region. First off, let's start in Seoul, a battleground region, as this is the most populated area of the country with a lot of independent voters that do not lean toward either the Democratic or Conservative parties. So let's take a look here. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung has earned 47.6%, followed by Kim Moon-soo with 42.1%. Next, in Busan, a conservative stronghold, Kim Moon-soo is outperforming Lee Jae-myung by earning 51.9%, followed by Lee Jae-myung with 40.3%. Over in Daegu, another conservative stronghold, Kim Moon-soo is clearly taking the lead here by earning more than 70% of the votes, followed by Lee Jae-myung with almost 20%. Next, over in Incheon, Lee Jae-myung is beating Kim Moon-soo by gaining more than half of the votes, but we'll still have to see how the final results turn out there. Next, over in Gwangju, a liberal stronghold, more than 40% of the votes have been counted there, and Lee Jae-myung is clearly in the lead by taking more than 80% of the votes. In Daejeon, this is a battleground region. As of 11:30 p.m., it's a neck-and-neck race, with Lee Jae-myung gaining 51.8%, followed by Kim Moon-soo with almost 40%. In Ulsan, this would normally be seen as a conservative stronghold, but it seems to be a tight race there, with Kim Moon-soo earning 46.3%, followed by Lee Jae-myung with almost 45%. We'll have to see how the final results turn out, but if Lee Jae-myung takes the lead, this will be the first time in South Korea's presidential election history that a Democratic Party candidate has led a Conservative Party candidate in Ulsan. In Sejong, now this is a region where Lee Jae-myung has vowed to transform into the country's administrative capital, and Kim Moon-soo also pledged to build a second presidential office there. So let's take a look there. Looks like Lee Jae-myung is in the lead by taking more than half of the votes, followed by Kim Moon-soo with around 30% of the votes. Next, over in Gyeonggi-do Province, Lee Jae-myung previously served as the governor there from 2018 to 2021, and Kim Moon-soo was also the governor of Gyeonggi-do Province for 8 years from 2006 to 2014. So let's see who's in the lead. It's still too close to call, with Lee Jae-myung gaining 49.2%, followed by Kim Moon-soo with 41.8%. And moving over to Gangwon-do Province, Kim Moon-soo is in the lead with 47.3%, but Lee Jae-myung is also gaining more than 40% of the votes there. Now let's go over to the central part of the country in Chungcheongbuk-do Province. This is an important region to look at because it's considered a swing region in presidential elections. Candidates who gain more votes in Chungcheongdo provinces were not always but often elected as the president of South Korea. So let's take a look here. Lee Jae-myung has gained almost 50% of the votes, followed by Kim Moon-soo with 42.7%. And in Chungcheongnam-do Province, another crucial swing region, Lee Jae-myung is also in the lead by taking almost half the votes, followed by Kim Moon-soo with 43.4%. So we'll have to see how the final results turn out there. Jeollabuk-do Province, this is traditionally a liberal stronghold. Lee Jae-myung is beating Kim Moon-soo by a wide margin by taking more than 80% of the votes. Jeollanam-do Province, another region with many liberal voters. Lee Jae-myung again in the lead with more than 86% of the votes there. Next in Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, this is a conservative stronghold. Kim Moon-soo is in the lead with more than 60% of the votes, followed by Lee Jae-myung with around 25% of the votes. Gyeongsangnam-do Province, again, Kim Moon-soo is in the lead by taking almost half of the votes there. Last but not least, in Jeju, we'll have to see how the final results turn out there. For now, Lee Jae-myung is in the lead by taking more than 50% of the votes, followed by Kim Moon-soo with almost 40%. But I have to remind you, with only around 36% of the votes counted nationwide as of 11:30 p.m., we will still have to wait for the final results, and I'll make sure to bring you more updates later on. Mogyeon?
Thank you for that update, Seunji. So while candidates and parties have dominated the headlines, the voices that matter most in any election are those of the voters. My colleague An Sung-jin hit the streets to hear directly from citizens about what this presidential race has meant to them and what they hope to see moving forward.
The 21st presidential election has come to an end.
From 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, more than 14,000 voting stations nationwide, including this one in Sadangdong, Dongjakgu, Seoul, were open.
Starting early in the morning with the older members of the population showing up as soon as the polling stations opened, to families with young children, throughout the 14 hours of voting, people continue to show up to cast their ballots, right up until the last minute before polling stations closed.
This is my first vote ever, and I'm proud to be participating in it. I would like them to work on making Korea a better country to live in.
Now that I've finished voting, I'm going to go to work right away. I hope someone honest becomes the president.
Our economy is going through a difficult time right now, so I hope the new president can boost our economy domestically and internationally, and also improve people's livelihoods.
After they headed out of the polling booths, many were seen taking pictures in front of the polling station with a ballot stamp on their hand. This shows that a lot of Koreans are participating in an I voted movement. There are also these kinds of certification sheets with art or characters on them, where people can get stamps to show that they voted. Voters came to exercise their right to vote in hopes of electing a president who will lead South Korea through a pivotal period. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
So before we proceed with our news, we just have to take a look at the footage of Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung giving a speech to his supporters in front of his private residence as he departs his home to give his victory speech in front of the parliament. Let's take a listen.
네, 아직도 개표가 진행 중이어서 뭐라고 말씀드리기가 섣부르긴 합니다만 만약에 이대로 결과가 확정이 된다면 우리 국민들의 위대한 결정에 경의를 표합니다. 제게 주어진 큰 책임과 사명을 우리 국민들의 기대에 어긋나지 않도록 최선을 다해서 수행하도록 하겠습니다. 감사드립니다.
So it's just past midnight here in Seoul, and with over 50% of ballots now having been counted, the presidential race is coming into focus with exit polls and major broadcasters' projections showing Lee Jae-myung decisively leading the race and also being a projected winner. But beyond the numbers, tonight's election sends a powerful message about the public's hopes and expectations for the country's future. To help us unpack what this means, we are joined once again by Professor Hans Schaddel from Yonsei University here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, Mokyeon. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Professor. So as we've heard, we had a short footage from Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung, and exit polls are out, and broadcasters are claiming that he would be the projected winner tonight. How significant do you think is this consensus?
Well, the public has given him more than 50% total. So, that is a call for change in itself, considering that there were more than two candidates, considering that Lee Jae-myung appears to be poised on track to finishing about 10 percentage points ahead of Kim Moon-soo, the PPP, People Power Party challenger. PPP, of course, was trying to hold on to the presidency, but of course, Yoon Suk-yeol, also from the PPP, ended up getting impeached and removed from power after his attempted martial law bid. And that, in many ways, I think, has been the driving force of this election. I do think that other issues, domestic issues on the economy and on the cost of living and the business climate here, they were certainly on the minds of voters, and a lot of foreign policy considerations are also on the minds of voters. But all of that took a back seat, and I think there were a lot of voters that wanted to send a very strong message this time around to the PPP that going outside the bounds of the Constitution was not acceptable, and that gave the Democratic Party a window this time to gain control of the presidency, something that they tried to do in 2022. They tried to hang on to control of the presidency after the Moon Jae-in presidency, after the previous impeachment of Park Geun-hye going a decade back. They lost the presidency 5 years ago on a lot of those domestic and foreign policy issues. Now they have it back in the name of constitutional democracy, and certainly that will be a big theme, I think, for Lee Jae-myung, assuming that he carries through with this victory.
Right, so it was definitely a strong message, and it's a sign that people really were shocked about the martial law declaration, of course. Now, let's also circle back to the election itself, Professor. In the final weekend, candidates have been focused on, rallying and campaigning in specific regions. We hear Lee Jae-myung rallied in the capital, and Chungcheong, Kim Moon-soo, Gangwon, and Gyeongbuk, and also Lee Jun-seok targeting youth in urban areas too. Based on tonight's trends, which regions tonight turned out to be more decisive than expected, and what might that suggest?
Well, you're right, Mokyeon. The candidates really tried to win everywhere this time around and across age groups as well. What stood out to me in the numbers across regions that Eunji was just presenting a few minutes ago was that in the southeast region of the country this time around, it seems that the Conservative Party, again, the PPP, doesn't seem to have the kind of stronghold across across that entire region that they would normally expect in an election. They won overwhelmingly, it seems, the way the vote count is going so far in Daegu. Daegu, of course, is usually the single most reliable city that comes through for the conservatives. That seems to be holding tonight. But very interesting that in Ulsan, a city known for its car manufacturing center, that there the two main candidates are, at this hour anyway, still pretty much in a dead heat, still too close to call in that city, which suggests that voters this time around, aside from all the constitutional questions and martial law questions that might be in the back of their minds, that they're also concerned about the economy and that they didn't think that the Yoon government, the PPP in the presidency, was helping that community get where it wanted to go. Now, we don't know yet to what degree the local economic anxieties played into the voters' decisions. Of course, with upcoming trade talks between Korea and the U.S., the future of Ulsan will be very much hanging in the balance, I think, as a key car manufacturing center for Korea. But there we see some hesitation about the PPP. And even in Busan, again, reliably a conservative stronghold, it does seem as if the PPP is hanging on to power there, or hanging on to the plurality of votes there, but not as strong numbers as you typically might see. But again, this is an election where the then ruling party in the presidency, the PPP, is now getting punished. And in the capital region so far, I'm guessing anyway from the numbers, the way they're turning out, that Jae-myung on balance will win in both Seoul and Gyeonggi-do, and with half the country now living in the metropolitan area near the capital, that in itself is significant. So as hard as the PPP tried to win the capital, it might not come through. I can tell you anecdotally, in my subway stations in my eastern corner of metropolitan Seoul, I didn't see the DP there campaigning continuously as I did 5 years earlier, or 3 years earlier in 2022. That's what you might expect, is both candidates out there in full force. They weren't taking the neighborhood for granted, but I could see that the PPP was working a lot harder to win over voters across the country and across the capital city. It didn't seem to quite come through for them this time around.
Well, it's quite interesting to see, how the shift in political maps have been happening. Well, of course, it's going to be based on the past experiences that people have observed. Now, let's also talk about the youth and generational divides. Professor, based on the numbers we're seeing right now, are there signs that younger voters showed up more, and did they kind of swing the race in any meaningful way?
Well, what's very interesting about younger voters is we are seeing some of the same dividing lines between men and women that we began to see in very pronounced numbers back in 2022 in the last presidential election. You'll recall, I'm sure, in that election, we saw that more than close to 60% of women voters in their 20s in 2022 voted for Jae-myung. This time, it's roughly the same proportion, but among men voters, by contrast, there was a big drop in support for Jae-myung. Last time, I believe, there was more than, in fact, I have the numbers written down here. Last time, 36% of men in their 20s voted for Jae-myung. This time, 24%, according to the exit polls. We'll again see the detailed numbers once they fully come in, which suggests that men in their 20s leaned much more conservative this time around, even with the martial law declaration. On the other hand, men in their 20s did not give their backing to the PPP, to the mainstream conservative party. 36% of men in their 20s went for Kim Moon-soo. 37% of men in their 20s went for Lee Jun-seok, the third party candidate, who otherwise is polling pretty far below expectations tonight. So for young men, that's a significant shift compared to the rest of the population. What we're also seeing is voters in their 40s and 50s, people that are typically reliably for the Democratic Party, and were so again in 2022 when Jae-myung almost won the presidency. This time even more so. 60% of voters in their 40s in the 2022 election voted for Lee Jae-myung. This time it appears to be over 70%. So a big boost in support this time. Overwhelmingly voters in their 40s sending a mandate to the DP. Same for voters in their 50s, also turning out for Lee Jae-myung in higher percentage terms than last time around. Elderly voters, people in their 60s, a little bit more in the direction of the DP. Voters in their 70s, less so, almost identical to the way that they voted in 2022. So these generational lines are always very interesting to sort through in the election. And I think what's interesting, going back to the People Power Party and what happens to them, how do they regroup? Do they continue? Do they rebrand themselves? Does Lee Jun-seok try to deliver some sort of a merger with them down the road? Lee Jun-seok performed quite badly, it seems, in the general election overall. But because he did better than average with young men and even young women in their 20s, I believe he was showing about 10% with young women in their 20s compared to 7% across all the age brackets. That suggests that Lee Jun-seok can try to make a case to the PPP that his party represents something of the future to the conservative movement. Or he can try to make a case to the country more generally. So he seems as if he's poised by staying the third party candidate to continue to try to influence how the landscape plays out and the balance of power may shift over time between the two major parties here.
Right, so his policies and his statements definitely would have resonated better to younger voters. Now, we are going to look beyond the domestic picture of this. Professor, how might the outcome of this election reshape South Korea's approach to diplomacy, especially with the U.S., North Korea, and China?
Well, Lee Jae-myung has been sounding a very pragmatic tone throughout the campaign, Mo-kyun. A lot of voters who did not go for Lee Jae-myung tonight, again, according to polling data that we've been seeing leading up to the election, even according to interview conversations that we're seeing reported, a lot of voters have been fearful of Lee Jae-myung, perceiving him as perhaps too pro-North Korea, too pro-China. Voters that prioritize South Korea's alliance with the U.S. are anxious as to how he might interact with the U.S. government. On the other hand, Lee Jae-myung has been going out of his way to sound very pragmatic and pro-U.S. in his campaign speeches, arguing that a future-oriented approach toward the U.S., but a constructive approach, an approach that works with the U.S. collaboratively on all sorts of issues, economically and in terms of geopolitics and the military alliance and so forth, that this is something that he sees as paramount. And Lee Jae-myung has also sounded, I think, much more favorable than, say, his DP predecessor, Moon Jae-in, last time around toward Japan. During the Moon Jae-in presidency, relations with Japan were still somewhat chilly. They were also chilly in the Park Geun-hye presidency. Yoon Suk-yeol changed that. He pivoted the country much more in a favorable direction toward Japan. So again, voters are wondering this time around, would Lee Jae-myung go in a different direction with Japan? But Lee Jae-myung so far is also voicing a lot of support for a collaborative relationship with Japan, continued partnership in the trilateral collaboration, the three-way collaboration going on between the U.S., Japan, and Korea. On the other hand, there's China and Russia. And on that front, Lee Jae-myung, I mean, he's in a tough neighborhood of the world dealing with several different political strongmen, and you'd put Donald Trump in that category as well as Kim Jong-un and, of course, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. So Lee Jae-myung's got a lot to work with in foreign policy, but he is also maintaining that Korea can have a harmonious relationship with these two countries, and even having an eye toward a constructive and, of course, with China, very highly interdependent economic trade partnership in place with China. There's a lot, of course, China is Korea's #1 trading partner, and that's not likely to change in the years to come, I think. So, he's got quite a balancing act to carry forward here that he's set out for himself, and I think that means the public is going to hold him to it. So, he's going to be very excited that he's won. Of course, he's had a meteoric rise in about a decade and a half in Korean politics, but now he's got some real weight on his shoulders, and we'll see that with foreign policy.
Right, definitely a lot on his plate. It's a very complex situation. We'll really have to see. Now, so speaking of, Lee Jae-myung himself, who's been chosen as the projected winner, let's delve deeper into his personal background, Professor. It seems as though he's now on the verge of becoming president, pending confirmation, of course. So from a factory worker to a human rights lawyer and now a politician, president to be possibly, it's quite trajectory. How did this personal journey shape the way he have been received by voters?
I think it's a compelling journey. And of course, he was born in the early 1960s when the country was still in its early stages of economic advancement, born in Andong. So he can relate to people out in the provinces. I think it's one reason he gave so much attention to a nationwide campaign this time. I think he takes a lot of pride from coming, from Andong, in a region well outside Seoul. I think like a lot of people from his generation, he made his way into the capital region. He's, again, as I was saying a moment ago, he's not really been a high-profile political figure for all that long. He got elected mayor of Seongnam in the year 2011. Seongnam, if our viewers are not familiar with it, it's what's become a large city just to the southeast of Seoul. I first heard of Lee Jae-myung in that decade, actually, occasionally visiting community events in Seongnam. Some of my relatives lived there. I remember going to soccer events and the like in Seongnam and often seeing the city really going all out to welcome youth programs and hearing that Lee Jae-myung was part of that. He really catapulted into the national limelight in the 2017 presidential election when he emerged as a kind of long shot candidate within the Democratic Party as an alternative to Moon Jae-in. Of course, Moon Jae-in handily won that election, but Moon Jae-in had been on the scene longer. Moon Jae-in had, of course, been Roh Moo-hyun's chief of staff a decade earlier. He had run for the presidency in 2012. So Lee Jae-myung didn't really stand a chance maybe against Moon Jae-in, but he made kind of a splash. In fact, he was thought of in 2017 as Korea's Trump. There were a lot of people. Eventually, Yoon Suk-yeol also took that label 5 years henceforth. But 2017, Lee Jae-myung was kind of seen as the Trump-like candidate, somebody maybe a bit of a relative newcomer to politics, someone a little bit more blunt, rough around the edges, less of an insider in the national political scene, but he didn't quite make it. And in the years that followed, Lee Jae-myung became much more of a national figure. First, as the governor of Gyeonggi-do province, not just the mayor of Seongnam anymore, but the chief political officer for all the cities and towns that ring around Seoul, Seongnam included. And then in 2022, he made his way to the National Assembly after losing the presidential race. Tried another time in 2022, came so close but didn't make it for reasons that we've discussed, a lot of which I think had to do with foreign policy, maybe also the economy to a degree. But I think the December martial law decree, when Lee Jae-myung really put himself out there front and center on live video, live streaming his dramatic entry into the parliament grounds at a time when Yoon had sent the military over there to try to stop the parliament from taking action. Lee Jae-myung going in, his party following him in, the leader of the People Power Party also asserting the parliament's ability to put down martial law. That was a very dramatic period. Lee Jae-myung really became world famous during that period, maybe even more so than his previous presidential bid, which wasn't successful. So from there, he had the power, I think, to set an agenda as to where the country would go and really have the upper hand. And this time around in the presidential campaign, his party was united right behind him. So the DP has become very much his party over a period of years, and especially in the past couple of years.
So he has this whole background and a lot of careers, and he stood up as the nation's presidential candidate during this martial law declaration. And he has also, I hear he also survived an assassination attempt in 2024, which was very shocking. Can you remind us of what happened?
Yes, no, that was a period of contentious politics. I believe he survived a stab attack in early 2024, which, was a traumatic moment. Korea is, of course, not a country where you typically see guns on the street for starters, but knife attacks, unfortunately, are not unheard of. And when that attack happened, it reminded me of the attack that happened about a decade ago on the U.S. ambassador here at the time, Mark Lippert, who also was attacked at a public event. And I know that was a huge surprise and a shock. So sometimes political violence does happen here. To me, it also reflected the deep polarization that can exist in the society, and maybe the fact that Jae-myung had also been seen as a kind of in-your-face and polarizing figure. And of course, the other side of Jae-myung that we have to pay attention to is he's faced several legal problems over the years, corruption challenges. You know, his candidacy was actually even thrown into doubt for a short period of time about a month ago when some of those legal problems, including a past alleged election law violation, were finding its way back in the court system. Those legal problems are not yet over. And I think one concern that many voters will have about Jae-myung winning the presidency is what happens if the legal cases come back to haunt him and if things start to look more unfavorable for him. And presidents do have a degree of protection while they are in office, but still the court of public opinion makes a difference. Alleged improprieties can make a difference. This country's been through 2 impeachment processes, first with Park Geun-hye in 2017, now with Yoon Suk-yeol earlier this spring. And I am sure that some of the voters who either didn't go for Jae-myung or just didn't give him their vote of confidence this time around or stayed home, that may be in the back of their minds. That I think voters are really hoping that the next president will survive, first of all, and govern with integrity.
Right. It was a very shocking incident, and many would hope it won't happen again. Let's all hope for that, but we will have to conclude our discussion right here tonight. Professor Shadows, thank you so much for your insight and staying with us at this late hour with us.
Thank you for having me, Mo-kyun.
Thank you. Now that wraps up our special election night coverage for this hour. With a projected winner has now having emerged while the vote count continues, we'll be back shortly to bring you more details and reactions as well as a victory speech. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.